it is very possible to use any curriculum to homeschool your kids. However, because curriculum is not magical, it's just material that you use to teach your kids. It's the books, the worksheets, the videos, the discussion guides that facilitate your learning. And at the end, I'll be sharing with you guys the new Masterclass series that I'm going to be starting next week. And we're going to dive in to every subject specifically in that, because every subject has things a little bit different. But first, I'm going to talk to you a little bit and tell you a little story. So when we were homeschooling the preschool years, I don't play well with my kids, so I started doing homeschool stuff. So I found a lot of stuff on Pinterest. We read a lot of books and stories. But when it was time to get serious and do the real schooling, I bought an all-in-one curriculum, like a lot of people do, because they're quick, they're easy, they're all-in-one. But immediately, not everything fit. If we were going to keep homeschooling, I knew that I had to find and do things differently, because all-in-one doesn't fit all kids. So I started swapping out different parts of the program, and we started to find a better fit. But it's also started to look like nothing like the all-in-one program was supposed to be used. But it worked for us. And let's see, my oldest is going to be an 8/9th grader this year. She's 13. So that was about 8 years ago that we started down swapping things out. And every year we tweak things. And sometimes, including this year, I still bought a multi-subject curriculum package, but we will not be using it as written, because I know that doesn't work for us, and we have found a way that does work for us. So the only way that we've homeschooled all these years is because we've adapted and changed and to make things fit our kids. Because the longer I homeschool, the more outside the box I discover our family is. In fact, recently, since we were last probably together in a workshop, I've discovered a few labels of my own to add to the outside the box of our family, which make a lot of sense. And I'm really excited to learn more and lean into knowing those differences so I can do things better for myself. So let's talk about, I'm going to share my top 3 go-to strategies when it comes to teaching our kids and adapting curriculum. So the first one, and sometimes this is actually the hardest one, whether we were a public school or just knowing people around us, and that is we want to start ignoring their grade levels or ignoring their age levels and just think about where our kid is at for whatever it is we're trying to teach them. So when I swapped out all of that all-in-one curriculum and had it and had to start swapping things out, the first thing that I had to swap out was the reading, because my child wanted to read early. And so when we have that early elementary curriculum, the reading program that came with the grade level we bought wasn't the right level for where my kid was. So we had to swap it out. And every kid learns at a different pace. That's the beauty of homeschooling, right? Is that we can teach them at their pace, whatever that is. So another thing is, for my struggling writer, when we had that all-in-one curriculum, we couldn't do the worksheets that were part of the curriculum because they couldn't write yet. So again, I had to swap that out and go in a lower level writing so that they didn't have to, so they could do things in a way that fit them. So when we look at things based on where they're at, then we can find things that fit them better. In fact, just this week, I was working with my 8-year-old, or sorry, he's 9, with my 9-year-old to find a writing program for next year. And so I actually sat down, and he can read. So I sat down with the schedule on my computer, the like assessment test of like, hey, can your kid do this? Can your kid do that, to help place them in a different level? And I actually had him look at it and be like, so does this look interesting to you? You know, which level do you think you're at? So, which feels totally like cheating, but he actually did that last year and picked the writing book he wanted to do because I had a few on hand. And it worked because he kind of knows what he needs to learn or what looks hard or what looks easy. And so he picked what he wanted to do, and he picked a higher level than I was planning to pick for him. So, but that means he's ready to rise to that occasion, and he surprised me. So secret number 2 on how to adapt things to help our kids. Secret number 1 was ignore their grade levels, use assessments from curriculums you're looking at using, and just think about the skills they have and start there and build on them. Strategy number 2, secret number 2, is you can adjust the pace or speed of the material. Teachers' guides are wonderful to tell us what to do when, but it's also really helpful to follow your child's lead. So when we were really excited, the first time we did a literature-based curriculum, my kids were so excited to read the books that they had included together that they always asked for more. So we read more. The only thing is then we finished the program in 4 months instead of using it for a whole school year because they wanted more. And so in that case, we could accelerate through the material because they wanted to learn faster. But when my dyslexic student was starting to read and it wasn't clicking, the 1-year level reading program, we had to stretch it out over 18 months because they needed to go at a slower pace. And that doesn't really mean that anything was wrong. It's just that was the pace he needed. We needed to spend 2 to 3 days on a lesson instead of 1. And that same dyslexic student is now that 9-year-old and is reading the same books as his 13 and 12-year-old big brothers and sisters. So it's not holding him back any longer. But at that time in life, in his education, we had to go slower. And when it clicked, and we were able to make progress. Also, that dyslexic child, he loves his math. So he started doing math extra early, and he has been at it at an accelerated pace really early. So he's even further ahead in math. So, but then my other child that has dyscalculia, we had to circle back and repeat math 2 or 3 times. So it's not in a bad place. We're just adjusting the pace and the speed of the materials so that it works. So we can still use the materials that are in a curriculum package, but we may not follow the exact day-to-day plans that are provided in the teacher's manual. That is something that we can choose to adjust and change because we are the teacher and we know what's best for our kids. So the third thing is actually something that I learned from another teaching expert that we actually used for our family. So first one is to meet them where they're at. The second one is to adjust the pace or speed of the material. And the third strategy is to keep it short. Some of you have homeschooled for a while, some not so much. In homeschooling, your day is not going to be 9 to 3 like a traditional school. With 2 middle schoolers, we're still often wrapping things up before lunch, even now that we're in the middle school years, or they have a couple independent things to do. It's a much shorter day, and that's still with a later start than what they would get in the traditional school. But we worked with the Demi Learning Coach. They make Math UC, Spelling UC, and now they also own Write Shop writing programs. And we were working with their coach. My daughter actually wanted to meet them when we went to a homeschool convention. And so they helped us with her dyscalculia. And she taught us as we were doing some of their AIM program for some remediation, helping them memorize her facts, that the way their program is designed, and we found this to be true for math, and it can be true for a lot of other things, is having the sleep in between super short lessons. While the child is sleeping, their brains are actually making the brain connections that they need to retain the information. And it's moving from the short-term to the long-term memory, which is really important for our kids to retain the facts, specifically for math, but it's also true in other things. So having short lessons is really more helpful then saying, well, we need to catch up, so let's spend an hour a day instead of 20 minutes isn't really that helpful. Because often the hour a day leads to tears, which brings me to my next point, and that is, if there's tears in a lesson for a day or two, it's good to stop what you're doing and just try again the next day. But if you have tears over the course of a week on the same thing every day, then that's a good sign to stop and look and see how the learning's happening and what else might be triggering. Maybe you went too fast, or maybe it's something they're not interested in, or maybe they're not sleeping well. But it's always important to value your parent relationship with your child over being their teacher and making them get the coursework done. So these are three of the biggest things that I use in our homeschool every day to change and adapt to fit our kids. But there's so many other ways that each and every subject can be tweaked, and even tweaks that work for specific subject areas, kind of like the math that I just explained. So I want to ask you a question. So are you interested in learning more about these strategies for the specific subject areas? Is that something you guys are interested in, or are you guys good with these three basic strategies? See, Amy's in North Carolina, Diana's in Canada, Syracuse, New York. You guys are from all over the place, and I'm here in Illinois. So let me know in the chat, guys. Is that good, or do you guys want to know some more strategies? Diana, you want to know all of them. So there's a lot of ways, and there's a lot more information. And I also don't want to take all your time because I like to keep these workshops short and sweet. So we're going to be offering this 3-part masterclass that I mentioned at the beginning, and it is called Adapting Curriculum Subject by Subject. So we're going to spend 3 weeks to, oh, Cassandra, that's a good question. We'll hit that at the end. We're going to spend 3 weeks diving into each subject area of your homeschool and looking at the strategies and pinpoints as far as what could be different kinds of triggers to different learning disabilities or other challenges in the classroom, and see what those other strategies could be and to help you guys be successful in them. So we're going to take a deep dive. So it'll be kind of like 3 workshops over the next 3 weeks as part of the course. So that when I sell my workshops, they're $15 each. So that's like $45 value right there. And then each week we're also going to have a big long Q&A session where you can bring any of your homeschool questions to me, and we'll talk about them deep in whatever it is. So Cassandra's talking about knowing what's curriculum versus something else. So that's something we can dive into during our Q&As each week. But I want to save you guys the time and struggle in trying to figure this out, because I didn't have anybody to help me with these things. And now I have learned all these things over the last 8 to 10 years of our homeschool, and now I can share them with you. So, and because we've learned all these things, my kids are actually leaders in their community. And this week, today, I'm pretty proud because we had our 4-H fair and they all got blue ribbons talking to the judges and some extra honors as well. So pretty exciting to see them participate and be able to discuss and talk to all those judges. But that's because we've been able to implement these things and they feel confident in their learning and their knowledge because of the way we homeschool. So our group coaching, usually if you're meeting one-on-one, my sessions start at $30. If you're in my other coaching programs, it's even more than that. So we're going to meet for 3 weeks. So that's like 3 coaching sessions. So that's going to be like $90 of coaching plus our workshops, which is $45. And then you guys get lifetime access. So we're going to have these live classes, but then you guys get to watch the recordings and go back and watch them whenever you need. And so that's another $30 value. So all of that together is $165. And I want to give this to you guys for $24 to come for the next 3 weeks, because we dive into each of these subjects and talk about the specific strategies to teach them. So I'm going to put the link in the chat. I'm also going to send this out on an email too. But for the next 3 Tuesdays, we're going to sit down and we're going to dive into each subject area and talk about what those strategies are. Next week, we're going to talk about the language arts. There's so many parts to language arts, which makes it one of the hardest ones to figure out how to adapt and change things. And why I really don't like all-in-one language arts programs, because there's so many moving parts to learn. And we're going to get into that next week specifically. And I'm super duper excited. So I do want to answer the questions that have come up too. And I want to encourage you guys to think about investing in your homeschool this year by coming and learning all of these things. There's so many different ways. It's one reason there's so many curriculum companies out there, is that there's so many ways to teach, and there's so many ways the kids think and that parents teach, so that we want to have different curriculum options for different kids to be able to do all of those things. So we're going to meet for the next 3 weeks on July 26th, August 2nd, and August 9th. We're going to talk about the language arts. We're going to talk about math. We've used so many different math programs. Even in the last week, my kids were using like 3 different math programs. So because they each learn differently, and it's not even necessarily my choice, because I want to use the program that helps them learn the best. And then on week 3, we're going to talk about content subjects as well, talking about history, science, art, those things where really they're just acquiring knowledge during the course of the class, and how we can look at teaching those subjects in a variety of ways. So we're going to break down and talk about over the next 3 weeks how to adapt specific subjects. And I was sharing, so I gave you my 3 tips. We're going to talk about specific subjects coming up in this master's class. And if you guys have questions, I'm going to start answering them. I have a few that were submitted early, and I definitely see some in the chat. So I'm going to start with some that were submitted early, so they can come back and watch them on the replay, and then we'll get to the ones in the chat. So I have somebody, Nicole is telling me that it's their first year and they're looking for language arts. So that is what we're going to talk about next week. So there's 4 parts to language arts: writing, spelling and grammar, writing as in handwriting, spelling and grammar, writing composition, and reading phonics. So those are all 4 different moving parts. And so I'm actually going to have my artistic 13-year-old hopefully help me draw up a diagram for you guys, because those are all 4 moving parts. And so we're going to talk about how to look at each of those and separate them and have them work together, and how they all cross paths as far as picking what is the right things to use when. Jessica says, I'm looking for ways to make the transition for her middle schooler. So again, we're going to talk about what that looks like for each thing, and talk about what works for your kids, and the coaching that we're going to do is going to be really helpful and important to be able to answer your questions. Kristen is asking that she's purchased stuff and she's looking for flexible curriculums. So things that I like that are flexible is things that are subject by subject. The first all-in-one curriculum, the history was woven into the Learn to Read program, and the science expected you to go to the library every week. Well, I didn't want to rely on going to the library, so it wasn't a good fit, and ended up buying some books instead. And it was really hard when my kid wasn't reading at the same level as their program, because then they were missing out on history. So I really like programs that separate by subject, even if they kind of match. So we're a big fan of Bookshark. And while their independent reading books often have a theme that matches their history, they're not necessarily meant to be read at exactly the same time. So they're related and the learning all kind of goes together and complements each other. It's not tied to each other. So if a certain skill isn't quite matching, you can still use it and you can swap things out without sacrificing the whole curriculum. And the other question she had was, what do you do if something doesn't seem to be a good fit after you actually try it? How can you tweak it versus start again? So, and we talked about that at the beginning, talking about changing the pace, figuring out what is working versus what isn't working so that you can keep the parts that work and throw out the parts that don't, because it is a tool. At the end of the day, curriculum is just a tool for you as the teacher. So, Amy, you had a question. I have accumulated several things over the years, and it can be difficult to know what will work best without trying everything first. Yes. I have quite the curriculum closet myself. I have learned the hard way a few times to not throw anything out and get rid of it until the youngest child is totally past it. As I said before, we've used Demi Learning products, and I thought the first time that one child used MathUC that it was horrible and I didn't understand it and we would never use it. And I got rid of the blocks and we moved across the country. And within a year, I was buying new blocks and we've been using that curriculum ever since. So I had to learn that lesson more than once for one of my kids. So yeah, and it is good. In fact, I was going to be looking through my curriculum closet this week to pull out and see what might work for my youngest this year, to see what we had on hand for them to try. And it is good to look over and see what you have. And sometimes you do have to try. It's also good to sort of sit down and think about what are your students' strengths and weaknesses? What do they like? What do they not like about anything? And think about what they like to do. I don't have kids that really draw a lot naturally. So using a program like Draw, there's a handwriting program where you do step-by-step drawing and then you write about it. It wouldn't be a good fit for my kids because they're not naturally into art. Now, somebody who loves to draw, that would be a great program. My kids don't have the time span or the art skills or the interest to do something like that. So you can kind of think about what works and doesn't work, to think about, oh, I wish this program had blank, and then look for things that have blank plus what's already working, is one way to do it. If you can turn on your mic and tell me a little more, I'm happy to dig into that a little bit more. Ooh, Cassandra, your question says, I'm struggling to know when it's the actual curriculum versus some other reason. So, and then you also said your disconnect between the learning style versus learning and teaching style that you have as the adults. So you don't know if it's working because I don't know. I know it wouldn't work for me. So yeah, that's hard. And it is, I kind of loved our first year of homeschooling because I had a preschool. I didn't feel the weight of having older students, but we could sort of explore different teaching styles and different activities to see how my kids learned and how I taught. Because it's very true. There are some curriculums where you are going to look at and you're going to be like, wait a minute, this is very hands-on. This is very teacher-driven. And I don't like that. That's not the way that I want to teach. And so it's not a good fit for your family because you want it to be a good fit for you as a teacher, as well as for your students as a learner. And sometimes that's in using those adaptation techniques we talked about, and that you can look at it and figure out a flow that works for you. And sometimes it's a matter of saying, nope, this isn't going to work because I don't want to put in the planning because I'm not that kind of teacher. And that's okay too. I am not a salt map, arts and craft, big project parent. It was a big deal when we did a chemistry unit study. And We did all the experiments that were involved because that was the first time that I'd ever done that. Usually I would just say, hey, let's read the book. Let's watch the YouTube experiment. We're not going to actually get out the supplies. And I'm still kind of that way, mostly because my highly distractible ADHD kids and myself will get out all the supplies, be very uninterested in the experiment, and then leave the mess and not want to clean it up. So I know that's not really a great thing for us, but sometimes we get really into a project. This year we explored coding, and my kids, 2 of my kids just took C++ coding projects to the fair. One of them is going to our state fair from our county fair with their project. That was something we got into as a family, and it was something we all had a lot of fun learning and diving into together. So you can kind of see what you do want to value, what kind of a teacher you are, as well as what kind of a student you have. And there are ways, and there are so many curriculum options out there that you will find something that values both the way you teach and the way your student learns. So Diana says, I like the idea of a literature-based language arts, but I imagine that means fiction. Does literature-based include nonfiction? How do we use nonfiction in all subjects that is not textbooky type curriculum? I also may need different levels within a subject. Great question. And that is true. Yes, so literature-based language arts. So often that looks like basing things around a novel, where you would do spelling or handwriting practice using passages from a book. And typically what you see are unit studies that use fiction or historical fiction. But you could totally do a nonfiction book too. You might have a harder time finding stuff. I know there's a lot of biography studies out there. What is it? Peanut Butter Fishies, I think, is the name of her site. She has a whole series of unit studies based on the Who Was books. Yes, Peanut Butter Fish, Cassandra, you know who I'm talking about. And so she has a whole series on the biographies on who was, what was, all of those books. So that would be a great place to start, Diana. My kids love the science comics or show me history graphic novels. Those are both nonfiction graphic novel series. So you could easily do things and then come up with writing assignments based on those more sciencey topics, those history topics that are nonfiction. It doesn't have to be fiction. A lot of people like stories. Historical fiction is a great way to do history without it being, like you said, textbooky. Another word that people use for that is living books, where it's more first person. It's not that dry writing of a textbook, but it's more lively because you're getting the firsthand experience from it. But it is true, a lot of kids do prefer nonfiction. So having those kinds of sources, I actually have here at my feet a whole pile of books from Beautiful Feet Books that we've been looking at, that I'll be sharing more about on Friday on the blog. But they use living books. Charlotte Mason is a good homeschool philosophy that uses living books to teach history programs. And so very hands-on first thing. Yes, rabbit trails is another one. Yeah, they have the unit studies. So unit studies would be a great approach for you, Diana, about that as well. So yeah, I mean, my kids are reading books all the time, and then we talk about what they are doing and go into the different topics for to help them with their learning. So we have some more friends joining. I'm so glad you guys are here. I was just answering some questions. Since we have so many people, I'm going to recap the 3 tips that I shared. And that is, the first one is that we want to, the first strategy to adapting curriculum is to meet them where they're at. Forget about grade levels, where they should be at based on their age. but to think about exactly where their skill levels are at and then meet them there and then help them grow from where they're at. We had to do this with several of my kids in different subjects at different times. The second strategy is to adjust the pace or speed of the material. Having a teacher's guide or a teacher's manual, instructor guide is great, but it's just a tool and an outline. So you want to use that in a way that works for your kids. So if your kids are ready to go fast and double up lessons. If your kids aren't getting it and you need to slow down, slow down. Most likely, unless you have twins or you're teaching lots of kids together, they're probably a class of one in their grade level. So they can't really be ahead or behind because it's a class of one. There's nobody to compare them to. So go at their pace because that's where they will be successful and your family will be happy as a result because everybody's learning at the right level. And the third tip was to keep your lessons short. A little bit of learning every day goes a really long way. So when you spend a little bit of time, if you're new to homeschooling, let me reiterate, your homeschool day will be a lot shorter than a traditional school. I'd like to say we are still often done by noon, even with 2 out of 3 being middle schoolers. So a little bit of learning every day. If you see the tears, stop for the day. If they're crying every day for a week at the same point in your school day, evaluate what's going on for that part of the day and maybe change it up in some way, whether you change a different program, skip a topic and come back to it, but value your parent relation first, your parent relationship with your child over being their teacher and getting the work done. And then the last thing I did was I announced that we're going to be doing a subject by subject adapting curriculum masterclass starting next week. So that's going to be 3 weeks of live meetups, and each week we're going to take a deep dive into a specific subject area because there's so many different ways to adapt each subject. They all have their different strategies and different things to look for in trying to pick curriculum that matches your kid. So that's going to be, I shared the link a little bit ago. I'll drop it again here. That is a, there's going to be a charge for that class. There's going to be 3 more weeks of coaching, unlimited Q&A, lifetime access to the material, and then the 3 master classes. We'll be talking about language arts 1 week, math the 2nd week, and the 3rd week we'll talk about the content subjects, including history and science, as well as some of the other kinds of things. So there's the sign up. For those of you that came in late, if you have any questions, drop them in the comments and I'm happy to answer them. And I'm so glad you guys are here. I'll be putting the replay up and sending it out via email and putting it in the Facebook group and sending a link as well for the My Homeschool Village if you're joining us from there.